I'm Vivian Caldwell, 36, founder of an education tech firm and the woman who watched her husband waltz with her sister beneath the chandelier she paid for. They moved like it was rehearsed. I stood still, invisible in a room I once designed for my own anniversary. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was. Just smiles that vanished mid-turn and eyes that refused to meet mine. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. Before I tell you how I turned betrayal into leverage, stay if you've ever been erased in a room you built. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are. The ballroom was the kind of space that made everyone look like they belonged in a magazine. Burnished gold, white roses piled in tall glass vases, music gliding across the air like silk. I had chosen this venue myself. Years ago, during a business gala, I'd made a note of the lighting, the high ceilings, the hush of expensive elegance. Back then, it had been for me and Graham. Now it was Aubrey's night. The pearl hairpin caught the light as she spun, and my stomach curled the way it does right before you speak and realize no one's listening. That pin. I'd given it to her last Christmas, tucked inside a velvet pouch, because she'd been crying about how Mom always made the holidays feel warm. She hadn't thanked me properly, but she'd worn it now, without hesitation, like it had always been hers. I stood near the bar, a glass of untouched champagne in hand, fingers slowly warming the stem. No one offered to take my coat when I walked in. No one greeted me beyond a smile so shallow it evaporated by the time they turned away. I wasn't supposed to be the center tonight. I knew that, but I didn't expect to feel erased. Aubrey sparkled. That was the only word for her. She wore silver with a plunging back, every step designed to pull eyes toward her. Graham, of course, was in black. He always liked looking classic. His hand rested on the small of her back too long, fingers spreading as they twirled beneath the chandelier. People applauded politely. Someone near me whispered, "Isn't that her husband?" A glance over a shoulder, a shrug. No one intervened. I forced myself to watch. They moved in slow, careful turns to "The way you look tonight." Graham leaned in, his lips brushed her ear, and Aubrey laughed. Her head tilted just the way mine used to when he told me secrets. The room kept going as if nothing had ruptured. I wanted to scream, but I'd made a career out of silence, out of showing strength through stillness. The gift box in my clutch pressed into my palm. Small, navy blue, tied with a white ribbon. I'd chosen it for Graham weeks ago. Cufflinks shaped like tiny anchors. He'd once said I made him feel grounded. The irony would have been poetic if it weren't so pitiful. I walked across the ballroom slowly, the way someone does when they're hoping someone, anyone, will stop them. A hand on the arm, a call of their name, but nothing came. I set the gift down on a corner table next to a wilting bouquet and stepped away before someone could ask what it was for. My heels clicked against the marble as I left, echoing louder than any applause. The air outside bit through my dress, but I didn't shiver. Not until I sat in the car and closed the door did I let the silence press against me fully. Then my phone buzzed. "You weren't supposed to see that?" From Graham. I didn't cry that night. Not because I was strong, because I was calculating. The sky outside my window was still a dull charcoal gray, Charleston not yet ready to admit morning. My house sat in that perfect silence where even walls seemed to hold their breath. The coffee in my cup was cold. I didn't bother heating it. I'd slept for 90 minutes, maybe. Long enough to stop shaking. Long enough to start remembering. The science fair. I was 12. My volcano, my research, my handwriting. But Aubrey stood beside it, smile wide, accepting a ribbon she hadn't earned. I hadn't fought her then. I thought letting her win once wouldn't matter. But it always starts with a smile and ends with a theft. The screen's glow cast shadows across my cheekbones. Lydia's email had arrived an hour earlier. Flagged urgent. Need your eyes on this. I trusted Lydia. She'd been with me through 4 product cycles, 2 lawsuits, and a brutal rebrand. She didn't panic unless there was reason. The attachment opened to a joint account statement. I scanned, blinking slowly. $48,000. Gone. Withdrawn in 3 increments, routed through an external vendor I didn't recognize. Something vague. Skybridge Consulting. I clicked the name. No website, no paper trail. Only a small wire transfer record with Graham's name listed under authorization. And my name. But it wasn't my signature. Not the one I used. My eyes narrowed. The C in Caldwell was looped oddly. There was a hyphen in the middle of my first and last names. Vivian Caldwell. Something I never did. But Aubrey did. In high school, when she forged Mom's signature for field trip slips, she always added unnecessary punctuation. Some habits linger. I whispered her name like a warning. She wasn't in the room, but it made me feel better. The cursor blinked over a second file Lydia had flagged. An altered licensing agreement. Our intellectual property from 3 quarters ago, stripped of attribution, rerouted toward a new division led by Aubrey. Aubrey didn't even know how our codebase worked. But Graham did. And he'd had access. I leaned back, bone-tired but locked into a kind of cold clarity. My hand reached toward the small lockbox in the corner drawer, one I hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside was a dusty USB drive, labeled Q1 in permanent marker. Graham had once told me he liked naming things like quarters. Gives it structure, he said. I slotted it into the laptop. The screen flickered. Static. Then color. A dim room. Graham in a navy blazer, drink in hand, lounging beside Aubrey on our old sectional. You think she suspects? Aubrey asked, grinning. She doesn't suspect anything. She's too polite for war. Aubrey tossed her head back, laughing. Vivian won't fight. That's what makes her useful. Graham raised his glass. To utility. She clinked hers against his. They drank. I didn't flinch. I watched it twice. Then I opened my inbox and typed 1 line to Julian Mercer, my old mentor at Stanford. We'd worked together once to dismantle a biotech smear campaign. He taught me how truth can walk softly and still crush giants. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence. I hit send. We move at dawn. They thought I was just a name on paper, but I was the paper, the ink, the architect of it all. The morning sun hit the windows of Julian Mercer's office like it was trying to bleach away every truth we were about to unveil. I liked that the room was quiet, carpeted, wood-paneled, nothing flashy, just serious. The kind of place where things got decided, not debated. Julian sat across from me, glasses low on his nose, fingers moving fast over his keyboard. He hadn't said much beyond, "We'll keep it clean." That was how he worked. Precise, unflinching, and faster than anyone had a right to be on a Monday morning. On my laptop, the Caldwell Ed Labs board meeting was already underway. I stayed muted, camera off, watching the familiar faces shuffle digital papers and sip from expensive mugs. They didn't know I was there. Not yet. Graham sat at the head of the virtual table, all charm and restraint. Aubrey Square was missing. En route to pre-gala prep, someone explained. Good. Let her walk into the chaos unarmed. Julian finished uploading the freeze order. That locks any further withdrawals from the joint assets and company accounts, including the Skybridge shell, he said, barely glancing at me. They won't see it until the transaction bounces. They'll panic before they read, I replied. He smiled faintly. Exactly. At 9:03 a.m., I unmuted, turned on my camera, and entered the boardroom. Good morning, I said, calm as rain. 4 members looked startled. One coughed awkwardly. Marcia Klein, head of operations, longtime skeptic, narrowed her eyes. Vivian, we didn't see you on the invite list. I don't need one, I replied. Article 4C of the Founders Agreement allows me access to all quarterly meetings in perpetuity, but I brought something better than a clause. I clicked Share Screen and dragged a file labeled Co-Founder Agreement Original Notarized PDF into view. The document filled the screen, complete with timestamps, legal seals, and my signature. Unmistakable. Unhyphenated. Someone whispered, "She still has the originals?" "Always did," I said, not needing to raise my voice. Grandpa Harlan's voice echoed in my memory. "You don't need to yell to make a room listen. You just need the receipts." I clicked the second file. The video. Gasps broke the air like cracked glass. "Vivian won't fight. That's what makes her useful." Aubrey laughed on screen. Graham, frozen beside her, lifted his glass and smiled. The silence after was thick. Marcia leaned forward. "Is that recent?" "Timestamp 6 months ago," I said. "From a USB Graham gave me when he still thought I was furniture." Another voice chimed in, nervous. "We should pause today's vote." "I second that," Marcia said. Her tone had shifted. It wasn't dismissive anymore. It was cautious, calculating. I knew that voice. It was the sound of someone realizing they'd backed the wrong horse. On my phone, a message from Aubrey popped up. "Funds aren't moving. Something's wrong." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I leaned forward, met Graham's eyes through the screen. He looked rattled, hands tense in his lap, mouth slightly open as if words might come. But they didn't. "Next time you sign my name," I said, letting the sentence breathe. "Spell it right." Then I clicked leave meeting. His screen froze in my final frame. They dragged me into court to prove I was unfit. They left wondering how I'd become unstoppable. Rain traced long fingers down the courthouse windows, whispering against the stone like it had secrets of its own. Inside, the family courtroom was bare and cold. No gallery murmurs, no rows of observers. Just a handful of people and the judge's watchful gaze cutting through the damp morning like a scalpel. I wore black. Not for mourning, but for precision. I didn't want to be soft. I wanted to be clear. Graham sat to my left, the picture of smug composure. His tie was red, too bright for a hearing like this. Aubrey sat behind him, her posture rigid, jaw tight like it had been practiced. She kept smoothing her skirt. Her nerves didn't match his bravado. Judge Morales adjusted her glasses and looked up from the docket. Her face gave away nothing. That was her reputation. Sharp, impatient with performance, allergic to theatrics. Graham's lawyer opened strong, voice dripping with concern. "Your Honor, we believe Ms. Caldwell's past psychological struggles, documented from 5 years ago, render her current guardianship of Noah potentially unsafe." A single document slid across the table. A diagnosis from a therapist I'd seen after my mother's death. Grief, they'd labeled it. Acute stress response. But nothing more. Nothing lasting, nothing dangerous. I didn't flinch. I reached for the envelope already prepared in front of me and handed it to my counsel. He stood without drama and passed it to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a notarized letter from the late Harlan Caldwell, Vivian's grandfather, designating her as Noah's legal guardian should anything happen to him unexpectedly. It is dated, witnessed, and filed with his estate executor." Judge Morales read it slowly. Her brow didn't move, but I saw her fingers tense just slightly. I could feel the weight of the courtroom shifting. Then I stood. "My opponents have painted a picture of instability," I said evenly. "But there's more than one kind of danger to a child. And not all of it comes with a diagnosis." I tapped the remote in my hand. On the monitor, login timestamps and IP traces appeared. These show multiple unauthorized access attempts to my private drive. Some successful. All from devices registered to Aubrey Caldwell. Among the files accessed were Noah's therapy notes, my medical history, and Q1 development prototypes, none of which concern her. Aubrey's face reddened. "This is a custody hearing, not your boardroom crusade." "I agree," I said, "which is why your access to my son's private files is even more alarming." The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Caldwell, if you cannot remain composed, I will ask you to step out." Aubrey shot up from her seat. "Why is she still here? This was supposed to be over." Graham's hand moved to calm her, but too late. He tried to recover. Your Honor, we only reviewed her credentials because the systems, our transfer of parental consent for education funding, it required her approval. We had to use her logins. A pause. The judge leaned back slowly in her chair, fingers steepled. So you impersonated Ms. Caldwell in both financial and custodial matters? Graham's lawyer swallowed audibly. That's not... He didn't mean... I heard him clearly, Judge Morales said. Her voice wasn't raised, but the weight behind it stilled every sound in the room. You brought her to court hoping to bury her, she continued. Instead, you've built her case for her. She turned to her clerk. Dismiss all claims against Ms. Caldwell. Initiate referral to the district attorney for investigation of fraud and unlawful access to private information. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in watching a house of cards collapse when you'd seen the match being lit days ago. Outside, the rain had let up, but clouds still hung heavy. Reporters gathered on the steps, already tipped off, already sniffing blood in the water. One called out, Vivian, how do you feel winning custody? I paused beside the railing, glancing up at the gray sky. This was never about winning, I said. It was about truth. You know it's over when people stop replying to your emails, even your co-conspirators. The conference room at Caldwell Labs was silent, stripped of its power. Chairs pushed back unevenly, fingerprints on untouched water glasses. The company logo still shone faintly on the wall-mounted screen, but the light felt colder now, like it didn't belong to anyone anymore. I stood in the doorway, watching without stepping inside. The room used to hum with strategy, ambition, pretense. Now, it was just a room. Julian had texted earlier. Full freeze confirmed. Transfer attempts blocked. DA's inquiry underway. I hadn't responded. There was nothing else to say. News broke that morning. Graham Maddox resigning from Caldwell Labs for personal reasons. The press release tried to spin it with words like transition and grateful service. But the media wasn't buying it anymore. Underneath the press statements, a different storm was brewing. Screenshots, leaked emails, wire transfers tied to Aubrey's name, foundation funds used to charter private jets, boutique spas in Lake Como, address listed at $11,400. Headlines roared, power couple implodes in real time. Betrayal isn't tax deductible inside the Caldwell fallout. Even the influencers who once reposted Aubrey's speeches now deleted her tags. I still hadn't answered a single interview request. At home, the air was clean. Too clean. Lydia was cataloging designs for Hemlock House, our new center, while trying not to watch me too closely. She knew I wasn't in mourning. I was in construction. In my study, I opened the drawer and retrieved the blue box. It looked exactly as I'd left it. Ribbons still crisp, corners untouched. I ran my fingers over the paper once before opening it. Inside lay a bracelet. Silver, clean lines, engraved on the underside, V, the constant. It was meant to be a gift, a reminder for someone else. But now it echoed something I'd nearly forgotten. I never stopped being who I was. They just tried to convince me I wasn't. I held it in my palm for a moment longer before sliding it into the bottom drawer, not to hide it, but to place it where it would wait. Until I no longer needed to remember. Until it was simply truth. Everything you lost, Lydia said from the doorway, her voice low. You've built again. Better. I nodded, not in pride, just in recognition. That was always the point. Not to rebuild what was broken, but to build something that wouldn't crack the same way again. Later that afternoon, I drove to Hemlock House. The scaffolding was gone. Sunlight poured into wide windows. The paint still smelled new, and the echo of footsteps filled the open space. A single chair sat at the front, facing outward. No plaques yet. No speeches. Just silence. Waiting. I walked over and sat down, the air still and clean. I closed my eyes and let it breathe with me. They thought I disappeared that night. but I just stepped into the light they never saw. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and pine, brushing through the courtyard of Hemlock House as autumn leaves scattered softly over white gravel. The building stood quiet and tall beneath a sky of gentle gray, its glass panels catching glimpses of light that broke through clouds like whispered promises. There were no cameras, no podiums or ceremonial ribbons, no applause. That was intentional. Inside, the walls hummed with quiet life. People moved gently through the space, some with tentative steps, others with quiet purpose. Survivors, women and men who had known the sting of being erased. Not with violence, but with silence, financial erasure, emotional decay, the kinds of betrayals no headline ever captured. Lydia flitted past me with a clipboard in hand, cheeks flushed with effort and joy. "We're officially at capacity for the first 6-week program," she beamed. Some even brought their own books and journals, like they knew this was waiting for them. I walked the hallway slowly, letting my hand graze the textured walls. Every brick had been placed with intention, not for prestige, but for permanence. In the art room, I found Noah crouched over a sketch pad, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. His pencil scraped gently. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He turned the pad toward me. A tall, wide house, its base dark and solid, its roof bright and steady. "It's a house that doesn't fall," he said simply. I smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. "You built that from the ground up." He nodded. "Will Dad and Aunt Aubrey ever say sorry?" I let the question settle. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't need that anymore." In a quiet corner near the small garden, a woman stood alone, staring at the trellis of wisteria beginning to bloom. "Tara," she introduced herself when I approached. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to take up space. I just wanted to say, you reminded me I still exist." I looked her in the eyes, steady and unflinching. "You never stopped existing. They just made you forget." Her lips trembled. She nodded once. Then she walked away, straighter than before. As the sky began to shift into dusk, I stepped into the foyer and unfurled the blueprint. It was old, yellowed at the edges, creased by time. My grandfather had drawn it by hand, back when he told me, "You build from the roots, not the roof." I pinned it in the glass case beneath the warm light. But this time I signed it at the bottom. Vivian Caldwell. It was mine now. Not inherited, not borrowed, not stolen back. Mine. I turned off the lights one by one, the building falling into a peaceful hush. The last door clicked shut behind me. As I reached the gravel path, I heard footsteps, then a soft knock behind me. I turned. Marcia Klein stood outside, coat wrapped tight against the wind. Her expression unreadable, but her hands weren't empty. She held a slim folder, its edges worn. "There's more you should see," she said. "This goes deeper." The wind pulled at the edges of her coat, and I nodded. Once. Not because I wanted to fight again, but because I wasn't finished building. They expected her to vanish quietly, but instead she became the architect of her own reckoning. Those who stole in shadows were unmasked not by fury, but by facts. Each truth laid bare like bricks in the foundation she rebuilt. Justice, like the roots of a house, grows slowly beneath the surface before rising strong and undeniable. Because when injustice is met with unshakable resolve, even silence becomes a weapon.